Right, welcome, and thank you very much for coming to my talk. Now, I'm a bit curious. How many of you are facilitating retrospectives? Can I see a show of hands just to know who I'm talking to? How many of you have been in a retrospective? How many of you came because you thought this would be fun? Oh. Well, appreciate it, but unfortunately, this will be very, very depressing. Yeah, really, like the people who, my friends who read the book already, they said, it's a great book, I know, but I'm really sad because I've made all those mistakes, and it's also a bit sad that you haven't learned from them yet. So I'm working on that. So the point with this talk is that I want you all to get better retrospectives by the awareness of antipatterns. And when you talk about antipatterns, what you're saying is it's bad solutions to often recurring problems. I'll go more into detail about that. But in order to sort of set the stage, I want to tell you how important context is. And in order to do that, I'll have an anecdote that I brought with me from my life, as always. So first, some of you might recognize this. This is hell, right? This is what you think of as hell, right? So do any of you know what the Vikings think of as hell? Because it's quite different. In Denmark, hell is very cold and very damp. It's raining all the time, it's misty, and it's called Niflheim. And it's ruled by Hel, and she's the daughter of Loki. And in Hel, or Niflheim, goes the people who haven't killed in the right way, like the people who didn't kill in a heroic way. They killed in a stupid way or a ridiculous way. So you go to Niflheim if you don't kill in the right way in Denmark. So I've got something to look forward to, I think. And why would I want to live in a place where hell is very cold? Well, I want to live in Denmark and not in Australia, because in Denmark we don't have these guys. Or we do, but they're small and they're just taking the mosquitoes. And the mosquitoes, by the way, are not dangerous. We also don't have these guys, only in the zoos. And most of all, we don't have these guys in Denmark. So that's why I want to continue living in the foreroom of Niflheim. But I want to talk about antipatterns and retrospectives just to set the stage. So you probably know what a pattern is. So a pattern is a good solution to a recurring problem in software design, object-oriented programming, patterns, dating, somewhere else. So you're in a situation, you have some context, you have some forces, and then you apply a solution, and that solution has some consequences, good or bad, and related solutions. And that solution is the pattern solution. And that's an abstract solution that you can take and you can use in your own specific context. Now, what's an antipattern? An antipattern is almost the same. An antipattern is you've been in a situation where you chose a solution, but then for some reason, your context means that that solution actually is an antipattern solution. And it's an antipattern solution because the consequences are larger than the benefits. And in that case, what you do is that you have a refactored solution so that you can sort of get the solution to the bad solution. And that, of course, in turn will have benefits, consequences, and related patterns. But how do you know what happens? I mean, when is it a pattern? When is it an antipattern? It depends on the context. So you could say that a few years ago, microservices as an architectural pattern was like the pattern. Everybody who wanted to do something about their architecture wanted to do microservices. But now we know better. We know that in some contexts, microservices as a pattern is actually an anti-pattern, and then you have to refactor it back to something different, right? Let me give you an example. So in order to make people behave well in all the warm countries, we created hell, which would make people behave well, because if you didn't behave well, you'd go directly to hell, right? In another context, like in my context, if hell was described like this, we'd be thinking, yay, drinks on the beach. Let's go kill some. No. We actually did, but we did it in a good way. So our refactored solution is that instead of having hell the way that other people have hell, we have a different kind of hell. Make sense? Yeah. Right, so what's a retrospective? Retrospectives is a chance to share something, to try and understand why things happened, to appreciate other people's work, to appreciate your own work, to learn, to perhaps make some experiments. But most of all, I'd like to quote my late father, who quoted somebody I don't know, so I'm just saying him, that to understand everything is to forgive everything. My father said that all the time to a nauseating degree. But the older I get, the more I see that he's actually right. If I understand why people did what they did, then I can forgive them, because it makes me understand. So that was a short intro to retrospective antipatterns. Now I'm going to talk about 6 antipatterns. In my book I have 23 antipatterns, and at YOW 3 or 4 years ago I talked about some retrospective antipatterns. So 2 of them are the same, but I brought some extra with me because I thought they're interesting as well. And as I did in the last talk, the setting is in Denmark, in a little company called Titanic AS that makes reliable navigational software for ships. And the company, for some reason, it doesn't go very well. Some of the customers are irritated. There's something about the integration test that's not really working. So they sent them all to a Scrum Master course, because now they want to be Agile. And Sarah is the one who's most eager to become the Scrum Master, so she becomes a Scrum Master. That is sort of the thing she needed to have to be able to do that. So she is a Scrum Master, and she is to after the first sprint, to facilitate the first retrospective. So what happens at the retrospective? She hears things as, Peter's not doing what he should. We're also busy, and Peter has to pull himself together. So she hears all these things, and in the end, Peter leaves the room and cries in the toilet. Have any of you been at retrospectives like that? Yeah. It's sad. And some people are laughing. You just, I mean, we can talk afterwards. So what the first, and I think the most important retrospective antipattern is prime directive ignorance. So some of you might have read the book by Norm Kurth about project retrospectives, and in that he nails that prime directive, not the prime directive ignorance, but the prime directive. And he says, regardless of what we discover, we must understand and truly believe that everyone did the best job he or she could, given what was known at the time, his or her skills and abilities, the resources available, and the situation at hand. So what he says is that when we enter a retrospective, we should actually believe that everybody did the best they could at the situation at hand, the best they could. I know it's difficult. I know it because I've discussed this with numerous people, and they say, but now if we know that Peter is slacking, or if we know that Sarah is stupid, or if we know that testers don't want to do anything, or we know operations are just trying to make life hard for us, how can we believe this? And then I'm going to borrow some pictures from the internet, is that I don't believe it, says the developer, and that is why you fail, says Norm Kurth. Because the important thing about the prime directive is if you don't truly believe this, then you will fail. If you just go into the room and you say, yeah, there's a prime directive, ha ha ha, but we all know better, then you will fail. If you don't actually believe in this, or at least try to believe in it, then your retrospectives will not work. Because you'll be trying to find flaws in others, you'll be trying to figure out who to blame, and you'll be trying to figure out who to shame. So let's swap to the next retrospective. So the next retrospective, Sarah has read about how to facilitate retrospective in her Scrum Master book, and she has seen that what you do is that you put up 3 posters, what to stop doing, what to start doing, or what to continue doing. And she gets some things up on these posters. One is, well, we should do more pair programming, we should have less meetings, and we should stop ignoring the pull requests. So, well, that's all very well. And so they say, well, this is easy, because we already know what to do. We just take these things and we make a little experiment on an action point, and we start doing more pair programming, we stop some of the meetings, and we stop ignoring the pull requests. Easy as is. Unfortunately, what happens is that even though they say they want to do more pair programming, and they even do it in the way that they say, well, 3 times a week we'll do 3 hours of pair programming, all of us in the team, it doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen because the reason for not doing more pair programming is not that they didn't know that they wanted to do more pair programming in the team. It was because some of the people in the team were very introvert and did not want other people to look at them while while they were coding. They actually felt that if somebody were looking at them while they were coding, they would feel insecure, and they didn't want to do that. And if they looked into that problem, they would know that if people are insecure and they don't want other people to look at their work, maybe it's because there's a lack of trust in this team. Maybe they're afraid that people will laugh and blame them and shame them at the next retrospective or even in the day-to-day work. So since they don't figure out what the causes are behind the lack of pair programming, they just continue at each retrospective to say, we want more pair programming, we want more pair programming, but the cause behind it, the actual problem, is not fixed. The symptoms might be fixed every week, but since that is just symptoms of something bigger, nothing really changes. And that's what I call the Wheel of Fortune. I call it the Wheel of Fortune because sometimes the retrospective is like spinning one of these wheels of fortune. And sometimes the things that you see pop up at the retrospective, you're like, oh yeah, we'll change that, we'll do something about that, and then that is the right thing to do. And when you change it, you solve the problem. But sometimes something pops up that's not the problem in itself, it's a symptom of the problem. And that's where you don't win in the lottery, right? Because you try to solve this, you remove something. It's like creating a skin cancer with skin lotion, right? The problem is still there. You might get the readiness to go down for a few days, but the problem will still be there. And the refactored solution to this is to think about the stages and activities that you need to have in a retrospective. In a retrospective, you have 5 stages. And it's very important that you actually go through all these 5 stages. That can sometimes be difficult when people say, oh, could we do the retrospective real quick this time? I mean, could we do it like in 45 minutes? And you say, 45 minutes, yeah, I'll try. And the next time they'll say, oh, but if we could do it in 45 minutes last time, maybe we can do it in 30 minutes next time. Could we just have a quick retrospective? I'm like, yeah, we could have a quick retrospective. But the problem with having a quick retrospective is that you don't have time to delve into the actual issues and the causes behind these symptoms. So you have to actually accept that there are 5 stages and they are equally important. The first stage is setting the stage, getting ready. This could be talking about, right, the action points that we decided on at the last retrospective, what happened with them? Did we do it? What did we get out of it? Do we want to continue doing this? It could be also, what is the theme of this retrospective? Is it the communication between us? Is it the communication between us and other teams? Is it the testing? Is it the pull requests? What is it that we want to focus on? Sometimes it's just everything and we need to figure out what's there, but sometimes there's a focus. And also it's very important to make everybody say something in the beginning. It doesn't have to be anything difficult. It could just be, what was your last meal? It could be, what was your highlight of the week? But if people are allowed to not say anything at the beginning of any meeting, then they feel like they're allowed to not say anything throughout the whole meeting. And that can be in particular a problem in retrospective where we want to share. The next step is gather data, where you look at the past. We could have a timeline where we have post-it notes, yellow for question marks, green for happy ones, red for sad ones, events that happened during the last sprint. It could also be like the regression test, or it could be results of the burn down charts. It could be any data. It could be something from the users. It could be communication with the management. It could be anything. But gather data so you have something to look at. And gather data together and look at the data together so that everybody knows the data, so that you make the big picture together. Because everybody has a part of the picture, but one of the beauties of retrospectives is seeing that become a huge picture for everybody. And now, the difficult part, the generating insights, the one that people normally skip, and that one that leads us to the Wheel of Fortune, is to try to look at all these data and figure out what's the story behind this, what actually happened. Some people are saying we should use the 5 whys. Some people are now discussing we should not use the 5 whys anymore because it's like a blaming game, so maybe we should use the 5 hows. How did this happen? So for instance, for a conference like this, I was just made aware this morning that there were some speakers who didn't get a specific information, and then we could start pointing fingers at people and saying, she should have sent that information, he should have sent that information, you should have sent that information. You also point fingers at yourself, but instead of doing that, it's much more valuable to figure out how would we have known that this information should be sent? How would we know when to send it? How would we know how to send it? And trying to look at the system instead of the actual people. This picture up here is is from the fishbone, where you make a cause analysis of different aspects of the problem. So you have a problem which is the head of the fish, and then you have the bones, I think they're called, or the ribs as different aspects. Could be product-wise, place-wise, people-wise, etc. But generating insight is something that you often skip because it's difficult and because it saves time just to go directly. Another reason for skipping it is that if you're working with developers, they're very trained in solving problems. So whenever they have a problem, they look at the solution already. So for instance, when they write down a problem, sometimes they'll say already when they put up this post-it note, and that means that we should do something like this. And keeping them sort of open in the communication before we start jumping to conclusions is very difficult. It demands a lot of energy. So the next step is deciding what to do. You can have SMART goals, you can have small experiments. You should be very about thinking about long-term and short-term goals, because sometimes you decide on some long-term goals and you say we'll do that in the next sprint, and then it won't happen because you can't do a long-term goal for half a year in the next sprint. So think about, when do you want to start? When do you want to evaluate? What is the success criteria? Who's the one responsible for doing that? There should be a name on each of these things. It shouldn't just be the team. Oh, we'll do that together. That never works. And also don't make the scrum master or the project leader or the team leader do everything all the time. Try to spread it out. And then you close the retrospective and you make a summary of what happened. Right, we came from this, we looked at these insights, we found these causes, we decided to do this, and then when we meet at the next retrospective, we'd look at these things and take away 1 to 3 things that you'd like to work on for the next retrospective, because if you take 10 things away, then you won't get more than 1 most done, and it'll just be frustrating, and you think that retrospectives are worthless and a waste of time. On the other hand, if you take away 3 action points and you just put them in your drawer, you have them in the email, and you go back to your JIRA, which is with the highest priorities, you don't get anything done, and the retrospective is a waste of time. Next time you meet at the retrospective, nobody's done anything, so we don't know whether it would have helped to do these things. So all these 5 stages are crucial. Let's go to the next retrospective. So after the next sprint, Sarah tries some fun activities, because she's looked at all the different online materials for retrospectives, and there are all these activities with balls and colors and plush toys and Lego and everything, and she wants them to play. Unfortunately, what she hears at the retrospective is people saying, "Oh, this is ridiculous. Do you really want us to do that?" And they're whispering about the waste of time in the hallways, and Sarah thinks to herself, how do I get them to do this? So this is about a facilitator that's disillusioned, a facilitator that comes up to the retrospective thinking, oh, this would be great, they're going to love it, this is going to be so valuable, and then meets something and becomes very disillusioned. Oh, that was the wrong picture. This is the right picture, sorry. It was like Freudian slip from this one. So the disillusioned facilitator, how many of you have looked like this when they've been facilitating sometimes? Great, 4. Okay, I'm going to talk to you 4. So I had this experience once when I was just starting to facilitate. I think it must have been one of my first 10 retrospectives I facilitated. And I had been to a conference and I saw an American speaker talking about how important appreciations is at retrospectives, how important it is to appreciate each other and think about the positive things. So I thought, oh yeah, that's really good, that's going to be fantastic. So at this retrospective, which was the first I had with this particular group, I thought, I was going a bit slow and they were negative and they didn't really want to celebrate anything. They were looking at all the things that went wrong. And I think retrospectives are equally about ensuring that the good things continue and are better instead of just taking away the bad things. But they had been a bit negative, so I thought, we're gonna do an appreciation game. So I made them stand in a circle, which was already a stretch for them. And then I brought a ball, and I was like, I'm going to throw this ball to somebody, I'm going to appreciate you for something, and then you appreciate somebody else and throw the ball, and then we have this ball game. It's going to be so fun. I was younger, you can hear that on the voice, right? So I threw the ball at somebody and said, you made such a great remark about this, I really appreciated that, thank you. And then he sort of looked at me. I said, yeah, you just think of something nice to say about somebody else in your team, and then you throw the ball. And he looked at me. And then he looked around the whole team like this. And then he just dropped the ball on the floor. That was bad. And being on the stage I was with facilitating retrospectives, of course I blamed myself. I thought, oh, that was silly of me. Why? I mean, in Denmark, that could never work. We're more in pillaging than actually giving compliments. So, well, you never heard of the Vikings giving compliments to people, have you? No, that's not how we work. So anyway, have I been where I am now, I would have thought, oh, that's a great gift, right? Sometimes gifts come wrapped up in really ugly paper and like smelly, but they're still a gift, right? You can unwrap it and you can see what's in there and you can learn something. So if I tried that now, I would have known, okay, there's something interesting here. Let me try to find out what is the causes behind this. Is it because he's shy? Is it because he really genuinely thinks there's nothing nice to say about the people? Is it because they're in a culture where it's like awkward to say something positive about each other? Is he afraid that he'll be called a gay? What's actually underlying issues here? I mean, it could be anything. So it would have been a fantastic gift to work with. Unfortunately, they never invited me to another retrospective. So let's go back to Sarah. Another sprint, another retrospective. And she hears things like, oh, the boss will never allow us to do that. One of the things that he thought about doing. We always discuss the testing framework, nothing ever gets done about it. Why can't the retrospective help us? They're just a waste of time and we never get anything changed. And when you hear things like that at a retrospective, it's normally because you've landed in the soup. So in the soup means that you are somewhere discussing something that you cannot change. The thing about retrospectives is that it's the people in the room are discussing things that the people in the room can change. The people in the room cannot discuss that somebody else should change their behavior, or that something they don't actually have any power over should change, because then it just turns into a nagging session. They need to think about the things that they can do something about. So an activity that I learned from Diana Larsen, and I've used a lot, is something called in the soup. So I start by, if they've collected a lot of data, or if we're in the midst of deciding what to do, if I had a lot of post-it notes, I draw these 3 circles on the whiteboard and I say, this is a circle with the things that you can do something about. This is a circle with the things that you can influence. And this is a soup with the things that you cannot do anything about. And then I ask them to take all the post-it notes that were on the timeline or wherever they were and put them into that. And then let's see where you think these things goes. And the interesting thing could be like, oh, we got change the location of the companies in the soup. They can't do anything about it in people in the room. Communication with the testers is bad. It's only something they could influence because they don't have the testers in the room. Or the code review, all major changes, that's something that they could actually do something about. And this is useful in many ways. One way it could be useful is to say, well, there's always the question, who should we invite for a retrospective? And normally I'd say just the core team. But if you see that there's something with the testers or with another group that pops up every time there's a retrospective, then you can invite them for the next retrospective. And then, of course, the circle of what you can do will be larger. Another thing that I use this for is that sometimes I have a team where they are always nagging about things that they cannot do anything about. Other people. They're discussing, complaining about other people. So I use this, and then when they make this soup, and they can see that a lot of the things that they're discussing are outside the circle of do, I ask them to look at this and say, so what do you see right here? I mean, how do you interpret this? All these things that you want to talk about, it's not something you can do something about. It's other people's issues. So instead of, I put up a mirror to them and I show them, actually, maybe you should think about what you should change about your own behavior. And the other thing that's interesting is, if you go into generating the insights with this one, you might dive into a few of these post-it notes, and perhaps you find out that there's some of them you can actually change. Some of them you might be able to draw closer to the core. So for instance, maybe you can actually physically move closer to the testers. That's something that you could do as a team, and maybe that would improve the communication. But also something that's in the soup, like changing the location of the company. Maybe you can come up with a reason for a local hub, and that could maybe be a way of influencing this. Right, next sprint, next retrospective. So Sarah hears a lot like the retrospectives are boring, they're a waste of time, we should have a better facilitator, Sarah is not very good, it's always the same things that happen. And Sarah herself thinks, I would like to get something out of them as well. So what we've landed in here is in a do-it-yourself retrospective. And that's an anti-pattern because if you're a facilitator, you have to really be very aware of the energy in the room, you have to be aware of the body language, you have to be aware of the time schedule, you have to be aware on what it says on all the post-it notes. Because if they put up a lot of post-it notes and you have one agenda, then perhaps you see that a lot of the post-it notes are about things that they cannot do anything about, things that are in the soup, and then you have to change the agenda so you take the soup activity in. Or it could be people are very quiet, they don't want to say anything, then perhaps instead of having plenum discussions as you proposed in your agenda, you have to change your agenda so that people talk together in smaller groups or even 2 and 2, because otherwise they're too shy to say something. There are all these things that you might want to change in the agenda during the retrospective, and you can only do that if you're 100% focused. And if you're 100% focused on the agenda, then you cannot be part of the discussions. So if it's your team and you're facilitating for your team, then there are some of the things that come up at the retrospective discussions that you want to be part of. You actually want to discuss this. This is important for you because you're part of the team. So you can either choose to ignore those discussions and not yourself get anything out of that, or you can choose to go into those discussions and get something out of that retrospective yourself, but then ignoring your role as a facilitator. The times I've tried to do that for my own team, it's always been like, oh, this is interesting. I dive into this discussion, and then suddenly somebody says, well, I know, aren't we going to change? And do we have time for the rest now? And I'm like, oh, I was in the flow of this wonderful discussion, and then I need to be pulled out to think about, oh, we need to change to the next stage of this retrospective. So doing it yourself is not a very good idea. One thing that you can do is a thing that we did at one of the companies I worked for, is to rotate the facilitator. So I was working for a large IT company in Denmark. We had both product development and consultants, and some of the other developers also wanted to be facilitators. So we decided that instead of just facilitating for our own teams, those of us that wanted it, we would make a public sheet so that for all the different teams, in this case we had the fabulous 4 unicorns with rainbows, FooBar, meme generators, and grumpy old men. These were the teams that wanted retrospectives, and then they would put into their spreadsheet when they wanted retrospectives, and then we would have the different facilitators, would be me, Søren, Christen, and Jesper. And then some teams would always want the same facilitator. So they'd say, we always want this facilitator because we really like this way of being facilitated. Other teams would say, we always want a new facilitator because for us it's important to get something new, new activities, new kinds of discussions. We don't want to just do the same all the time. And so one benefit was that we didn't end in those do-it-yourself retrospectives. I could actually, when my team had a retrospective, I could be part of my team and not think about anything else. But also, when I was facilitating for other teams, even though we have this Las Vegas rule, everything that happens in a retrospective stays in the retrospective, I could still cross-pollinate to the other teams. So perhaps this team decided in a retrospective to change the stand-up meetings in some way, and I was like, that's actually an interesting idea. And I could take that idea back to my team. So we would learn from each other, but of course we should be wary of actually really keeping our mouths shut so that we wouldn't be laughing at the other teams all the time. Now, time passes, and Sarah now has to facilitate a distributed team. And that's always difficult. How many of you are facilitating online meetings, distributed meetings ever? Any of you attending online meetings, distributed meetings ever? Right. So I'm going to show you an old video. Some of you might have seen it, but then I have a chance to get some water while we're doing it. So this video describes actually the anti-pattern for online retrospectives. I hope the demo gods are with me. Right, so this is an example of an anti-pattern I call disregard of preparation. Because when I started doing online retrospectives, again, I was really optimistic about how to do this. I thought I'll just invite people, and then I have this shared doc that we could all use to fill out during the retrospective, and that'll be great. But I'm dealing with all these problems that all online meetings are dealing with. But I'm also additionally dealing with the problem that a retrospective sometimes is talking about things that can be difficult, right? I want to go through all 5 stages. That's important for me. If I only go through 3 of them and I have to end, that's a bad ending. And if I have to skip some of them and I have to end, it's also bad. It's a waste of time. So it's very important for me that I have all the time allotted. And it's very important for me that I have a sense of where people are, whether they're stressed, whether they're angry, whether they're sad, which can be really difficult when you're doing an online meeting. So over the years, I've developed some rules for my distributed retrospectives. So the first rule is I always send an email the day before. And I do that because I don't want to have people trying to log into the different documents that we're using at the actual meeting. So 24 hours before the retrospective, you can automate this. I never do that because I'm not that organized, but send an email out 24 hours before with a link and any passwords that you need to have. I use like just anonymous Google Docs, which is easy. You don't need a Google account or anything like that, just a link. But there are numerous things out there you can use. So, and make people actually try to log in before the meeting, preferably the day before. And of course, at the first retrospective with a new group where you say this, only 5 out of 7 will actually have done it. But because they see like how embarrassing it is that they can't do it, then the next meeting they will actually do it. So that helps. Even though it's a blameless meeting, shame helps a little bit. And send an email 15 minutes before. And I do that because if it's a real meeting in real life where people are sitting together in an office or an office space, then they'll see other meeting getting up, and that'll prime them to think, oh, right, maybe I need to get a cup of coffee before the meeting or something like that. But if they're just sitting at the computer and it pops up, we've got 10 minutes to the next meeting, then I'll be like, yeah, I got 10 minutes to the next one. I can do my real work. But I send an email out 15 minutes before saying, now there's 15 minutes for this retrospective. Get up, get a cup of coffee, go to the toilet if you need that. Because what happens is that you might think, okay, I want to get up, get a cup of coffee, but when you stand up, you suddenly realize you have to go to the toilet. It's something that happens when you get older. You'll learn in a few years. So it's very important to remind people of their bodily functions so that they can get those taken care of, at least some of them, before the retrospective. And it seems ridiculous, but it's really, really helpful. And if you can do it with a little bit of humor, then people will actually read the email. Insist on video for all. That's also something that I've been really struggling with and that I'm still struggling with. Because they say, well, oh, I can't do video because I'm actually doing this retrospective from my car. You're not doing a retrospective from your car. Then you're not doing the retrospective, right? I want you to be able to look at this doc. I want you to be able to read what other people are writing. I want you to write in this doc while we have this retrospective. I want you to be able to focus. So either you drive or you're at the retrospective, right? No, I'm taking it at a cafe, so I really can't have the video because other people will be in the video. Don't take the meeting from the cafe for obvious reasons. It's noisy. And again, try to concentrate on the task at hand. So insist on video for all. It's difficult. And for some teams, I manage only like 80% of the time. But I have to say that after having done these distributed retrospectives for a number of years, sometimes I just say, well, if you can't really live up to my rules of distributed retrospectives, then I won't facilitate them at your place. Because I don't want to facilitate bad retrospectives. And if I facilitate a retrospective without having everybody's email so that I can send something out without being able to see everybody's facial expressions all the time, then I can't do it in the way that I want to do it, and I don't want my name on those retrospectives. Also, make sure everyone is equal. I often have like the context where you have like a head part of the team is like 2 or 3 people sitting together, and then you have the others as satellites sitting alone. And the people who are sitting together, they have the benefit that they can actually talk to each other. They're in the same room, and they might be talking to each other, and other people might not be able to hear what they're saying, so they're feeling left out. And they might also already feel left out because they're satellites. But it's not just the talking. It's also like the way they raise their eyebrows that other people can't see, or whether they're like doing this with their eyes that other people can't see. It's the way that they move their body towards one or the other person. It's the smell that other people are missing sometimes. That's nice. But there is communication in smell as well. And if you're not equal, if you're not all on the same, then you can't really get the full effect out of a retrospective. So what I say for people in these situations are, actually, you should all be sitting in your own room. And they say, well, we don't have rooms enough for that. Well, then you can't have retrospectives with me. So you can see that sometimes it falls down, but oftentimes you can get people to sit alone so that everybody's equal, everybody's got the same handicap. Now, if that is not possible, then I say, well, you can use an avatar. Some of you might have seen the now old movable avatar, where you can jump into another figure, and you can be that figure somewhere else. And what you do, your movements, changes the world you're in. Sometimes I have a group, and I have one person being a satellite. And then the group says, we really want to use like our sprint board, which is physical. We really want to make use of these physical things. We really want to be together, all of us, except this person who's outside. And I say, well, we can do that if you promise me that one of the people who are in the room can be the avatar of that person. And that means that they constantly have a communication going on where the person who's not in the room can say, can you zoom in on that? And the other one is walking around with the camera all the time, so that the one not being with people can zoom in on the different post-it notes. And when they want to write post-it notes, the avatar will write post-it notes for them. It can work if it's only one, and if the avatar and the other person can actually communicate. Also, prepare a strict agenda. I always prepare an agenda for a retrospective in real life or online. And I don't show people the agenda, because I want to be able to change it. As I said before, have an alternative agenda. But for online meetings, it's even more important, because if you're in a real-life retrospective, sometimes you are allowed to have 90 minutes retrospective, which is great, then you have time to go through all of it. But for an online retrospective, don't count on more than an hour, perhaps an hour and a quarter. So you really need to have a strict agenda, and you need to be able to change between the different stages pretty quickly and pretty swiftly. And maybe you have to warn people in the beginning. I'm going to be the nasty one who'll say, this is a great discussion for somewhere else. This is a great discussion that we do sometime else, because we don't have time for it right now. But make a strict agenda and have an alternative. And also, as you saw in the video, if people are just like 3 minutes late, then you lose 3 minutes out of 60 minutes, which is actually quite a big proportion of a retrospective. Last but not least, some people are tempted to record online meetings, because then other people don't miss out on it. Don't record it if it's a retrospective. Again, because things that happen in a retrospective stays in the retrospective. There are also some people who take like notes on a retrospective. They put notes down on everything that's said. I wouldn't recommend that either. Actually, what I say is that the only thing you're allowed to take away from the retrospective are the action points or the experiments. Like 1 to 3 pieces of paper with a name and an action point or an experiment on it, that's what you're allowed to take away. As a facilitator, I have a little black book, and I've had those, well, I'm on my 3rd black book now. And for each retrospective that I'm invited to facilitate, I write down the names of the people there, I write down where it is, and I write down my agenda. I write down my alternative agenda. I write down on this other page what were the action points from the last time, so that I can start the retrospective looking at what happened last time. For each person saying something, I put a little dot next to their names so that I'm reminded that they all have to say something. And then if I can see that some person has not said anything, then I'll change the activities, or I'll ask that person politely but directly. When people have said something 3 times, I don't need to give them any more dots, because then I am sure that they will definitely do it. But to me, it's very important not to write everything down. It should be something not forgotten, but something that stays within the team. So just to wrap up, these were 6 of the antipatterns that I wanted to share with you. The prime directive ignorance, the wheel of fortune, the disillusioned facilitator, in the soup, do-it-yourself retrospectives, and disregard of preparation. And as I said, the goals with this talk was that I want you to have better retrospectives. I want you to be aware of these antipatterns so that you can see, oh, I think we're entering like this antipattern right now. Oh, if we don't change this, maybe we'll end up in this antipattern. And then in the book, that you will get a coupon in an email later, then you can see what are the refactored solution. Also at the refactored solution you talked about today with, for instance, the tips and tricks for distributed retrospectives. So with that, I'll say thank you for your time. And I don't take questions in plenum anymore, but I'm here all conference and I'm very happy with questions, just not from stage. Thank you for your time.
Awesome.